This scene in Mark is set with two separate groups of characters standing on opposite sides of a door, insiders and outsiders. Outside, along with the scribes from Jerusalem, stands Jesus' family. The inside is where Jesus has just retired for a meal with his newly appointed disciples. Jesus' family has heard that he's behaving as if he's possessed, and they've come to intervene. The scribes are claiming that Jesus casts out demons by the power of Satan. Either uninvited or unwilling to enter, his family summons Jesus to come out to them, and he responds with a sweeping gesture that takes in all those inside seated around him. Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother. Shouldn't it be the other way around? Shouldn't those who represent the two major protectors of social order in that day, the family and the synagogue, be the insiders? With his simple gesture and words, Jesus turns this upside down. Any of us who have parented teenagers or can recall our own teenage years can relate to the family's feeling that their grown child is suddenly so possessed of outlandish ideas and behavior that he or she seems to have gone crazy. The ideas of the next generation so often seem to challenge the carefully constructed world the last one has created for itself. Yet, in an honor and shame culture, which existed both back then and exists even now today, a child's behavior, even when grown, is of great consequence. The social standing of Jesus' family is jeopardized by his behavior, and so the whole family feels shamed. Jesus' exorcisms aren't only for individuals, but for the social institutions that helped create the diseases he's healing. The social order that the Hebrew people had known for centuries was, in fact, already crumbling. As the land peasant families farmed for generations was consolidated into large estates, there was an exodus to the cities. Younger sons, in particular, were forced to leave behind the land of their ancestors for crowded and impoverished urban life. With the traditional clan network disappearing, Jesus was only pointing out the obvious. The people were indeed becoming, as Mark writes, a house divided against itself. Today, the Me Too and Time's Up movements have shaken various social institutions with their revelations of sexual abuse and gender inequity. These movements are seeking to exorcise not just sexual abuse, but a whole system of gender privilege rife throughout the structure of our society. They seek deep systemic change. The church is not immune from its own Church Too revelations. Never comfortable talking about sexual issues and fearful that truth-telling might jeopardize membership and funding, many churches are prone to deny sexual misconduct or to minimize it with platitudes about forgiveness. I read a historical account about San Francisco's Chinese American community at Cameron House, a youth and social service agency and formerly a national mission of the Presbyterian Church. Over a 30-year tenure there, the pastor sexually abused 3 generations of Chinese American boys. 40 survivors came forward, but some estimate that the actual number is in the hundreds. Years after this pastor retired, Cameron House and its partner congregation, the Presbyterian Church in Chinatown, recognized that the abuse had not just impacted individuals, but had sent out ripple effects on spouses and children, families and marriages, the entire congregation. Like the Hebrews, this Chinese American Christian community was divided against itself and in need of healing and deep systemic change. The Cameron House Board formed a healing committee. At one of their first meetings, the committee realized that if it were to undertake this healing work, Cameron House would claim a new identity: wounded healers. Many thought the agency was crazy to undertake a process of truth-telling and healing. Cameron House, they said, would lose funds and members and its cherished traditions. Yet Cameron House moved forward to name its wounds, change its culture, and in the process became a force for healing and a model for deep change. Just as it takes courage for victims of clergy sexual abuse to come forward, so too it requires courage for the church to confess its institutional sins and acknowledge the wounds and scars it bears upon its body. Many will call the church crazy, even possessed. But as the body of Christ in the world, the church needs to be possessed, needs to be crazy, in order to institute a new way of understanding ministry. Those of us who would follow Christ, those of us who would be his disciples, those of us who would live as and be the people of Christ's way, we're called, summoned, and challenged to be crazy. I mean, I don't want to be too quick to judge Jesus' mother and his whole family. They had good reason to be concerned. I mean, remember in Matthew where Jesus says, "The greatest among you will be your servant." That's crazy. Or in the Sermon on the Mount, we hear that what the world calls wretched, Jesus calls blessed. Blessed are the poor and the poor in spirit. Blessed are the merciful, the compassionate. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst, that God's righteous justice might prevail. Blessed are those who work for peace. Blessed are you when you are persecuted just for trying to love and to do what is good. Jesus was crazy. He said, "Love your enemies, bless those who curse you, pray for those who despitefully use you." He prayed while folks were killing him, saying, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." That's crazy. We need folks who are crazy enough to love like Jesus, to give like Jesus, to forgive like Jesus, to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God like Jesus. Crazy enough to dare to change the world from the nightmare it often is into something close to the dream that God dreams for it. I mean, think back to Jesus' crucifixion. Crucifixion was execution by the empire for crimes against the state. It was public torture, an intentionally brutal means of capital punishment designed to send a message that revolution and revolutionaries would not be tolerated. If you were a supporter or follower of the person being crucified, it was dangerous to stand too close by during the execution. The rational and sensible thing to do was to go into hiding or exile. So let's call the roll and take the attendance of the disciples at the crucifixion. Peter, absent. James, absent. Andrew, absent. Bartholomew, absent. Thomas, absent. Judas, definitely absent. Mary Magdalene, present and accounted for. Now that's crazy. And I've been thinking about some other crazy people. People like Harriet Beecher Stowe. Born in 1811 into a devout family, she's best known for her novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. In it, she told the truth of how chattel slavery afflicted a family, afflicted real people. She told the truth of the brutality, the injustice, and the inhumanity of the institution of chattel slavery. Her book did what YouTube videos of injustices and brutalities do today. It went 19th century viral. It rallied abolitionists, enraged vested interests. The influence of that book was so powerful that Abraham Lincoln is reputed to have said upon meeting Stowe for the first time, "So, this is the little lady who started this great war." A woman of her era was supposed to write nice stories, not stories that would disturb the conscience of a nation. She was supposed to marry well, raise well-bred children, participate in a few charitable activities, be fondly remembered by all who knew her. But Stowe had been raised in a family that believed that following Christ means being willing to make change happen. And sometimes that means caring when it's tempting to care less, or standing up when others sit down. Sometimes it means speaking up when others are quiet. Sometimes it means being different, even being crazy. When Steve Jobs died back in 2011, an old Apple commercial from the 90s went viral. It was a commercial that aired in 1997 that attempted to rebrand Apple products. The tagline for the commercial and the company was "Think Different," a phrase that is grammatically incorrect, which is part of the point. In the commercial, they showed a collage of photographs and film footage of people who have invented and inspired, created and sacrificed to improve the world. They showed Bob Dylan, Amelia Earhart, Frank Lloyd Wright, Maria Callas, Susan B. Anthony, Jackie Robinson, Muhammad Ali, Martin Luther King Jr., Jim Henson, Albert Einstein, Picasso, Gandhi, and on and on. As the images rolled by, the voiceover said, "Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs and the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius, because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." At Lake Highlands High School's graduation last week in Dallas, Texas, young Paxton Smith scrapped her valedictory address, which had been approved by school officials, and instead told her audience that it felt wrong. It felt wrong to talk about anything but what is currently affecting me and millions of other women in this state. Starting in September, there will be a ban on abortions that take place after 6 weeks of pregnancy, regardless of whether the pregnancy was a result of rape or incest, Smith said, referring to Senate bill which Governor Greg Abbott signed into law last month. In addition to banning abortion care after 6 weeks of pregnancy, at which point many women don't yet know they're pregnant, the law allows any citizen to sue anyone who aids or abets a patient who has an abortion, including clinic employees, friends, or family members who drive the patient to their appointment or providers. I have dreams, hopes, and ambitions, said Paxton. Every girl here does. We have spent our whole lives working towards our futures, and without our consent or input, our control over our futures has been stripped away from us. I am terrified that if my contraceptives fail me, that if I'm raped, then my hopes and efforts and dreams for myself will no longer be relevant. I hope you can feel how gut-wrenching it is, how dehumanizing it is to have the autonomy over your own body taken from you. I refuse to give up this platform that I have today to promote complacency and peace when there is a war on my body and a war on my rights, a war on the rights of your sisters, a war on the rights of your mothers, a war on the rights of your daughters. We cannot stay silent. That's crazy. We need some crazy folks in the church because sane, sanitized Christianity is killing us. That may have worked once upon a time, but it won't carry the gospel anymore. We need Christians crazy enough to believe that God is real, that Jesus Christ lives, crazy enough to follow the radical way of the gospel, crazy enough to believe that the love of God is greater than all the powers of evil and death, crazy enough to believe, as Dr. King often said, that though the moral arc of the universe is long, it bends toward justice. We need some Christians crazy enough to believe that children don't have to go to bed hungry, that the world doesn't have to be the way it often seems to be, that there is a way to lay down our swords and shields, that racism has to be eradicated, that every human being has been created in the image of God, and we are all equally children of God and meant to be treated as such. People of faith are called to have different values because we're asked to see this world through God's eyes. There's a difference between seeing the world differently because we look through God's eyes, a difference between that and acting bizarrely because we're trying to prove how different we really are. It's a nuance that I'm not sure I'm describing well, but is somewhat captured by a statement I heard many years ago. I called you to be different. I didn't call you to be weird. Our value system is going to be sometimes run against the grain of this world. Believing in a God of love and grace will sometimes make us look crazy. Acting on those beliefs, caring for the least of these, will make us look even crazier. But let's do it. Let's do it anyway. Let's work to see our world as God sees it. Then let us act in God's love, even though it may look as if we're out of touch with reality. The truth is, we'll be in touch with the most real reality there is. Let's do it. Let's work to see our world as God sees it. Then let us act in God's love, even though it may look as if we're out of touch with reality. The truth is, we'll be in touch with the most real reality there is. Thanks be to God. Amen.